Hello everyone, welcome to the Prime of Life. This is one of BLUEBARN's creative conversations, and tonight I'm here with several of the artists from the production of Marjorie Prime here at the BLUEBARN Theater. We're actually on the set of Marjorie Prime that has been in waiting for more than a year for us to finally be able to open this show. Hi, my name's Susie Baer Collins. I was asked to direct this show back in, I think, maybe 2019, and that began our journey with Marjorie Prime. I am a freelance director in town. I was long time associated with the Omaha Community Playhouse, and I'm currently serving as their interim artistic director. But I just wanted to give us all a chance to introduce ourselves before we go much further. So Ben, tell us about yourself.
Hello, my name is Ben. I play the role of Walter in Marjorie Prime. I think that's the best thing I can give.
You're done?
I like. I've worked several times with the BLUEBARN. I think this is my third time here in the BLUEBARN's new space.
Awesome.
Yeah.
No, you're done.
I'm done.
Hi, my name is Julie Huff. I play the role of Tess in Marjorie Prime. And this is my first time in the BLUEBARN's new space, and with some of these people, I closed out the BLUEBARN's old space with a little show called Our Town. So I'm happy to be in this new space. I am a solution architect for Khaki International, so this play really resonates with me because it talks a lot about AI technology, which is what I do for the other half of my day.
Hi, I'm Ablan. I play the character of John. I am a freelance actor and director. I've done quite a few shows in different places, and in the Playhouse and here. I've been very fortunate to bounce around, and I've had a blast doing this part, and I am excited to talk about it a little bit.
I'm Ruth Rath. I get to play the part of Marjorie Prime. I'm glad we're finally getting to do it. It's been a significant had a significant impact on my life for the last year. Just waiting to get a chance to do it. I'm a retired high school teacher and currently work at Harris Casino giving away money.
Woo, what could be better?
I'm Chris Hernandez. This is my first show with the BLUEBARN, and I had just recently graduated from college, and kind of through with the BLUEBARN going through everything with COVID and with college happening, I graduated, finished online, and was so happy to have the chance to come back and work with these amazingly talented people. So very thankful to be here to talk today about our experience.
Awesome. Here's how it's going to work. I'm going to maybe spark some questions, and everybody in the room is going to have a chance to answer. And you have an opportunity to ask questions or make comments in the comments section of the Facebook page. And we will address some of those questions and hear your comments a little later in the program. I just want to talk a little bit about the play Marjorie Prime. It's fairly contemporary. It hasn't been around that long. It was written by a man named Jordan Harrison, who was kind of fascinated with the idea of artificial intelligence. And the play happens in what is a kind of an assumed future, like 2060. The play centers around a married couple, John and Tess, and her mother, who lives with them, has some significant dementia issues, and she's elderly. And in this future time, if someone is having memory issues, there's a place called Senior Serenity that can provide you, I'm sure for a fee, with a prime that will help your loved one hold on to his or her memories. And in Marjorie's case, a prime is purchased of her late husband, who died 10 years prior. But instead of showing up, this AI creature that looks exactly like her husband and looks for all the world like a real human being, Marjorie has asked that he not be the age he was when he passed, but that he be the age he was like around age 30. So Ben plays Marjorie's husband, Walter, and Ruth is Marjorie, and Ablan and Julie play the husband and wife, John and Tess. As the play goes on, even more primes appear in the play, even though there's only 4 people in the show. Some of them play both humans and primes. We all thought this was a great play. We were very excited to get to work on it. I can remember very clearly having auditions, and I think maybe we read the play for the first time in January of 2019, and then kind of got seriously into rehearsals in early February. But then COVID happened, and we weren't able to continue with the play, although we were only 2 days from opening. So then we thought, well, maybe we'll open in April, and maybe this will happen, and maybe. And here we are now, in the run of a show on a set that has been here waiting for us to come back to it for more than a year. So I just want to ask everybody in the group what it was like to start working on the play, what you feel about the play. Let's start there. You know, what intrigued you about Marjorie Prime? Anybody want to go first? Got a thought, Ablan?
Well, I felt this play, you know, when we first agreed to do this, I felt this play was resonant then. You know, I think there were a lot of issues that I think were applicable to a wide variety of people. And then COVID happened, and here we are a year later, and I think the play has another whole layer of meaning, another dimension of what it means to care for someone, how we move through that, how we connect with one another, digitally or not. And I think there are just so many things that I think were heightened by what we went through. And I found that the most fascinating. And then, you know, coming back and all 4 of us were so eager, ready, and what we still held on to was lovely because it gave us an opportunity to just even explore more depth in what we had already done. So it was in some ways a terrible gift, but also a wonderful gift because we were given the opportunity to layer on something going through a wide experience of COVID. And that was fascinating to go through and really interesting.
Julie, you mentioned that you live in a world of artificial intelligence. What were your thoughts coming into the play?
Well, to be honest, you know, I was fascinated by the AI aspect of the play early on, but then the pandemic happened, and then there were all of the Black Lives Matter protests, and I knew that Marjorie Prime would be first up when we came back. And I was worried that it wouldn't, you know, the Blue Barn has such a reputation for putting their finger right on the pulse. And I was afraid that Marjorie Prime might not be the pulse.
Oh.
But then the year went on, and there were so many deaths. And everyone has lost someone. And a lot of what Marjorie Prime talks about is whether or not in the future, not only can technology help you remember who you are, but can it help you deal with grief? Mm-hmm. Can it get you through that pathway and out the other side? Mm-hmm. And I thought, and there are so many, you know, the incidence of suicide now is so high among children, for heaven's sakes. Mm-hmm. And we realize that technology isn't saving them. You know, yes, they can talk to their teachers, they can talk to their friends and over Zoom, but it's not saving them. So to me, to come back a year later, it like Ablan said, there's so much richness here now that we didn't have a year ago because we share this history of a year's worth of living, which for many of us was like 10.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and without theater. I mean, I remember when we walked in here for the first time and we just started sort of uncontrollably giggling because we were in a theater again and doing what most of us try to spend as much of our time as possible doing. Chris, what are your thoughts?
I really resonated with the play early. You know, I lost my father when I was 18, and so part of that was dealing with some brain damage. And so to really watch some of the more physical scenes on the stage where Ablan has to literally help Ruth back into the chair, and has to help her out. And accidents happen and all those kinds of things. And so from a very surface level view of the play, I really resonated with a lot of the physical things going on stage. And so then to come back and go a lot deeper into some of the nuance, into some of the, a little bit deeper, like what would that be like to bring a lost parent back? And is that going to help you? And is that beneficial? And where do you go with that? And does that make you feel more alone to be, as we look at COVID now and to bring people in a virtual way, do you feel more alone or do you feel more connected as you start to build relationships over FaceTime, over Zoom, all those kinds of things? Is that helping or is that taking away from the feeling of having somebody? And I think that's a really important topic that Marjorie Prime kind of just nudges you in the direction of. And I really appreciate that. There's nothing really to definitively walk away from it with it. You kind of leave with even more questions and those kinds of things. And that's the most kind of beautiful art, is to walk away and then have those conversations and to ask and to kind of explore that in that way. And I think that was something that I really resonated with throughout the whole year of this process, for sure.
We had to have a lot of conversations about suicide, about childhood trauma, about family secrets, about care for the elderly, care for people with memory loss. Ruth, I'm just curious what your reaction is to how we started
as
the play.
As the elderly person, it's fascinating to explore how to convey the memory losses and how it affects the whole family. And also how interesting it is how each member of the family reacts and relates to the primes that they experience in such different ways. And where are they coming from that makes them feel that way about that prime or this prime.
For instance, in the play, Tess has a hard time accepting the choice her mother has made to bring back her father, Walter, as a prime. She chooses him as 30 years old. And for a long time in the play, we wonder about that period choice. And then as the play goes on, we have an understanding of a lot more reasons. There's something interesting about what we choose to tell the prime might be limited to what we want our loved one to remember, and we might leave certain things out of things that we know might cause them pain they've already been through several times, and to make them go through it again is difficult. I saved Ben for last because he's the only actor in the play that never plays a human being. He is only throughout the play an AI, artificial, but darling.
Truly.
Sort of hologramish creation. So what do you think? What was that like?
I think one of the most successful things about this play is, in order for it to be somewhat conceivable, we were saying somewhere in 2050, 2060, for it to exist and for us to accept this universe that could exist, we have to have some sort of grounding in modern technology. And we can see in some hints of the play that, okay, maybe there's a little bit of Siri in this. Maybe there's some Alexa in it. I even think you see some hints of a Roomba in this. I honestly do. I mean, there are so many little moments where you are thinking, this could happen. This is conceivable that if we give ourselves enough time, if there are people asking for it, and if there are people that are willing to create it and manufacture it and sell it, it's very, very conceivable that can happen. And that's, in my opinion, terrifying. I think this play is, in addition to examining these relationships that are trying to exist once again, that are fractured, I think it's also a morality tale to a certain degree, in how this technology can exist with a human being and their emotions and their relationships. In some cases, how it can tear them apart. and our dependence on this technology that certainly already exists now.
Really?
And we are just upping the ante to a very severe degree that is really fascinating. So that is something I find really interesting
I
about the
think
play.
it is too. I agree. So we thought we had this play kind of figured out, and it wasn't easy. And we had a lot of help getting there. We had help from a gentleman named Dan Whelan, who works on a daily basis with elderly patients and people who need home care. Many of them have memory issues, and he was a great resource for us. We were also dealing with a character in the play that Julie plays who suffers with depression. And how in the world do you get through a play with a main character that is depressed without ending the play and just thinking, I never want to go to the theater again? And what we learned from our friend Janet Davis, who's a wonderful psychotherapist, was that just because you're depressed doesn't mean you act sad. It doesn't mean you act down all the time. You have great resources in you that allow you to put on a face. And that was just kind of mind-blowing. Anyway, so I want to ask next. We thought we understood. We were so excited to open. We were only 2 days away. And then we got on Zoom for a while because we were in COVID lockdown. But we thought maybe we were going to open in April. And that first rehearsal we tried to have after being in the theater on something called Zoom that all of us were sort of foreign to was abysmal and horrible. And one thing that I noticed when almost a year to the day later, we understood that we were going to have maybe 5 Zoom rehearsals. Ablan currently now lives in Sacramento. He was going to fly in. We were going to have about 5 days in the theater and open. And we got on Zoom to resurrect our play, and we were all really good at communicating on Zoom. I mean, it was just amazing to me how, and we were making progress in our own way with the play, even though we weren't together, literally together. So talk about coming back to the play. Who wants to start?
I'll start. I think I have just like an outside perspective of like, just getting to, when I work with the cast, I work just watching. And just kind of reading through. And so to look at it from the first Zoom rehearsal, I mean, this was a play that was 2 days from going up. It wasn't like we had line struggles. It wasn't like we had issues with pauses and things like that. And so to go into Zoom felt like it should just be like all of us getting on a phone call and working through it. And it was just, between connections and as far as Wi-Fi, not so much the interpersonal, but and just kind of watching those things happen. I mean, we were stumbling over each other, and we would pause for long periods of time. And if 2 people talked at the same time, of course, they kind of mute each other. And so we were running into all of those issues. And so at moments we would just stop. And I do remember kind of finishing that last rehearsal and just kind of feeling the energy of everybody was just like, oh, that was sad. and so just to be able to watch it and then just to come back, a year later and to have, of course, remember, what we had just gone through with the Zoom rehearsals and to have it kind of flow pretty normally and to feel like, oh, I don't think we're that far from being off book, and for it to, if 2 people spoke at the same time, we knew to just keep going because you're going to be able to hear audio at some point, and it's, all of those weird virtual things that we've picked up kind of just manifested and kind of flushed themselves out, honestly, which was cool. So from like a more broad perspective. Yeah.
It was interesting to connect through Zoom. That was what was interesting, is that, I think we all talked about this, all 4 of us. The lines were amazingly pretty still there. I mean, we were very, very facile with our lines coming back, and it didn't take much time. So
Had you walked away from your lines?
I had.
Pretty much.
I had.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, with the move and everything else, I didn't go anywhere near them, for a while.
I used them as mental exercise because as an older person, I need all the help I can get. So I reviewed them frequently.
Yes. I remember Ruth saying, the script has never left me.
That's true.
It was just interesting to be able to use to go back, and here we are dealing with a play with all of these tech themes, and many others as well, and having the medium we're doing this through was so digital, and we were still able to connect much more so in our second go around with this. And that was what was so interesting, is that we were like, okay, this was a challenge before. Clearly we were all, much more comfortable with this, but we were able to really have some meaningful rehearsals through Zoom. We got value out of those. It wasn't just a line bash. We were carving out things. We were reconnecting. We were like, oh, well, that was a different way you said that, or how,
Right.
So it was valuable. It was really valuable.
It seemed that, like you say, Ablan, it wasn't a matter of lines. It wasn't, we just dug deeper. We explored more, and we found ourselves going back into this once we got back into space saying, you know what, I thought I had this figured out, and now I found something way better, and we've improved upon this.
Yeah.
And looking back and saying, I can't believe this is what we were going to get them.
Right.
And yet, there was a wall that I think we hit, in that it was the most mechanical thing in the world, in that we would go, okay, I cross upstage here. No, I'm downstage. And that is what would bring us to a screeching halt, is figuring out when you took the bottle of water out of the refrigerator. And it was brilliant that we did have to acknowledge that. We did have to review that blocking, making sure Chris had that down. It saved us so much time, but that was the thing that disconnected us. That was the thing that really wrecked our brains, is when you came down the frickin' stairs. And thank goodness that's the one that held us up. I think that's also I think it's a wonderful thing in some ways.
But then when we came into the theater, there was not one misstep, because we had talked through the physicality of it. I also think too, I got a lot better with Zoom and we started to block out all the people that were not talking. So I'm looking right at Ruth, or I'm looking right at John, at Ablan, and my focus is right on that face. And so we can discover those relationships without, you would never do that on the stage. I don't sit and talk right at, but in the Zoom, we're doing that, and I think it allows you to discover those deeper relationships and build them that you see now that we're all on stage.
I remember a couple times, especially Ablan got kind of creative, where there's a scene where he walks away from the conversation, and he would be at his Zoom computer, and Julie would say something as her character, as Tess, and Ablan would choose to stand up from his computer and walk toward the back of the room, and now she's saying, John, look at me. So we were sort of even inventing some blocking to some extent. The playwright tells us that the people that are primes, if they are being engaged by someone, they are learning about who they are only through what other people tell them. So Marjorie tells Walter about himself, and John chooses to tell Walter what he was like and stories about his past that he can share then with Marjorie. And the playwright, Jordan Harrison, says, so if a prime is not in a scene, but the prime is present in the house, it's possible that we could see them on the periphery of the set. And once I heard that, I was like, oh, okay, we have to do that. I guess it was sort of a choice he gave us. But I've never asked an actor to be on stage and never move and be in complete silence as I've asked Ben to do that. There are times you're watching the scene and then suddenly you realize, oh my God, there's Walter standing against the wall. I do remember when your lovely wife saw it, she said, I've never seen him so still.
Right.
Anyway.
Honestly, I watch Ben every now and then just to see if he'll nod off and just kind of take a quick, and he's perfect, and I can't even tell he's breathing sometimes. I'm like, it's like he's had training at this, and yet it was like, hey Ben, why don't you just go on stage and just stay there? And it wasn't like anything that was needed, when we were casting, hey, how long can you stand in the corner of the room and just not move?
It's an unusual challenge for an actor.
Right.
You watch your posture. That's one thing.
Right.
It's great for your posture, and you do little mind games, and you remember all the lyrics to Billy Joel songs, and that's pretty much that's the insight to that talent right there.
I love that.
It's, yeah, did Ruth, did you have anything you wanted to add to that about being a prime? Ruth plays a prime,
I find it
Julie
very
plays a prime.
interesting how the human qualities that are being given to the prime cause them to make adjustments in their comments and their storytelling. Like when Walter decides not to use the word suicide, and you can see him making the conscious decision to use when he died, rather than the more brutal aspect of the boy's death.
Right.
So,
In the play, we get to actually hear John tell Walter about a time in their lives, he and Marjorie's life, that was highly traumatic and involved a suicide. And so then later in the play, there's a conversation with just the three primes. And it was interesting the way it's written, that the prime repeats the story in very much the same vernacular as he was fed the information, which I think is kind of interesting. And every once in a while, a prime will give itself away because it might be asked a question and it hasn't been fed that information, and it will literally say something that sounds very generic, like,
I'm afraid I don't have that information.
I'm afraid I don't have that information. Yeah, which is in the very first scene of the play, you may not understand quite what's going on, but that becomes a big hint, I think, when that happens. I've had people talk about this play and say that they liked, the play made them feel smart. That the play made them suddenly see something and they understood it and they got it and they connected it to something they'd seen before, or they predicted something that might happen and that might have come to pass. And, you know, I love that in movies. I love that in plays. I think that's really fun when that happens for me. I get to figure it out, but it's not impossible. You know, it's not some Agatha Christie thing where I know I'm going to go down the wrong way. I can kind of get there too. And as much as we've talked about this being about artificial intelligence, I've never been involved with a play that was more about human beings. You know, so it's a little scary what might be out there in the future. What would be your comments about what you'll take away from this play? What does it leave you with?
I think what astonishes me about this play is how subtle it is. You aren't hit on the head with giant epiphanies. There are moments that are mired in real experience, and that real experience causes some really wonderful connection on stage. And that falls under all the different things that we've talked about. But what I found is that people who have seen this and walked away, they're still thinking about it. They're still thinking about it because there are things that really are left up to an individual's own experiences or what they take. And I enjoy that immensely, that, you know, you're thoughtfully, I mean, you were talking about people feeling smart. I think too, Susie, people they think that because they're just unanswered things you can figure out, but things that you have to infer. And a lot of those are affected by their own, you know, experiences. And I just find it fascinating. I enjoy this because it really does provoke thought, and it provokes connection. It has within our cast, and I think it does within the audience too. Yeah.
And these days, I think we're sitting we have a house at the Blue Barn that seats 96 people, approximately, is that right? And we are only allowed, of course, with COVID social distancing, to have maybe a maximum of 20 people. So we're really grateful that we get to, on the 26th of this month, we get to have the streaming opportunity for the play that was recorded, I think, just before we opened. Yeah.
Download it.
Yeah. Yes, so we have a question?
We have several from our virtual audience. I'll start with Cecilia. Families and caregivers often feel reluctant to see a performance about their experience. Would you discourage them from seeing Marjorie Prime? If so, why? If not, what might you tell them to expect?
Good question.
It is a good question. I have a friend that recently saw a streamed production of theater and she really enjoyed it. And I was telling her about Marjorie Prime, and both of her parents died with significant dementia. And she just really didn't think that this would be a play she wanted to see. And it isn't my job to convince her that it would be. But having experienced the play, I can't help but think there might be something, I don't know, sort of cathartic about experiencing it through the theater. I worked on a play that was about a woman in hospice care. 2 women were in it. One of them was Julie. And we had several talkbacks related to the play that involved people who worked in hospice and those kind of things. And there were many people who heard about the play and just didn't think it would be their cup of tea, and some friend might have convinced them to come. And I never remember that anybody wasn't kind of satisfied that they'd had the experience. So that's my response to that. I don't know what you guys think about that.
I don't think the play focuses entirely on pain or suffering or the necessity to have this Senior Serenity service come in and be provided, because a wonderful thing that happens, it is a comedy in several moments, and that some of the funniest parts are when you see relief and levity and joy come to anyone that is interacting with a prime, where they hear a story that they don't remember, or they have some connection, and this prime is just like the person that they are now imitating or reflecting. And there's something wonderful in that. So maybe someone that has been in that situation or is in that situation can see that that sort of catharsis is pretty wonderful, and that we're not talking down to anyone, we're not placating anyone, we're not anything like that. I don't think we ever really pity anyone. There is definitely joy and comfort that comes in this show.
But people know what their limits are too,
Yeah.
for sure.
I would add just to kind of hop on that with you there, Ben, is that there are a lot of times that once you realize that Marjorie is struggling with a very real dementia, and you can tell it's the early stages because she comes in and out, that the writing of the play is very real. That having experienced some of that with grandparents, that once you understand that she is dealing with dementia, you start to spot it very quickly. And so if that is a trigger at any point, it is very real. The dementia that she's going through, and that there's some of that there that I could see that would be hard for somebody who had dealt with that with parents. But I wouldn't say I would never say that it's they're playing dementia. It's just the writing is real enough that there are moments where I do remember when we would go in and out of moments, or I would have to repeat stories, and there is a lot of that that's very real.
You lose your patience.
Yes, yes, because you have to just.
And I think that's part of the benefit of seeing someone tell your story. You're like, oh, I'm not the only one who lost my patience with my mother. Here's a story about it.
Yes.
And a line in the show really rings when you say that. When John says to Tess, she feels like she failed her mother after her mother's death. She's really in a spiral, and she doesn't feel like she did enough. And John says she loved you so much. And those words that are sort of affirming and validating. It's really hard to see that when you're the kind of human that just takes on all the guilt and all the blame. And at one point he says, it was easier for me to be human morphine.
Yeah. You
I
had
was
the
a
tough
little,
job.
she wasn't my mom.
And he says to her in that moment, it was obvious from a little farther away.
that she loved you.
That, yeah. And, you know, it's interesting because I think everyone should, I mean, to answer you know, everyone's going to have their own threshold of what they're comfortable with, but it really is about finding things that you recognize, connecting with those moments. And there's a lot of those in this, and I find that in many ways comforting. You know, it's nice to see similarities. It's nice to see things that you say, I remember going through that, or I remember, you know, and
It's not just me.
it's not just me. Yeah, but you know, they're done in real moments and shared in real ways. Yeah.
Another question?
We do. This is from Elizabeth, and directed to the actors who play both primes and their real counterparts. What was the relationship between those two portrayals? How did you inhabit the prime differently from?
I felt such a sense of relief to move from Tess in her spiral of despair to Tess as a prime. I'm like, okay, the hard part's over. It's not that you don't have to act, but you know, the prime is limited, so it was kind of a relief to cross that boundary in the play.
I felt a little more whole when becoming the prime because I was more in control. I had to be a little more mechanical. I guess I just egotistically wanted to be healthier, better, and that was my chance to be that way from the dementia and the decline.
The
physical
prime
decline.
doesn't forget a thing.
No.
I think for me that is the most challenging thing about this whole play is the scene that Tess plays with Marjorie Prime. And Susie's like yanking me back the whole time, and she's right. I wanted Tess to look at Marjorie Prime and say, there's my mom, the mom I always wanted, and she's so loving, and and that's the actor trying to make Tess be okay in the moment. And Tess is pulled in by the prime, but not very far. And the most poignant moment of the whole play for me is the end of that scene, and I don't want to give anything away. No one can see this. She looks at me as the prime with a look of love and just the tiniest wink. And that just tears me apart. That is the most poignant part of the whole play. Ruth's the killer.
Yeah. When we were talking to like Brendan Greenwald, she's the set designer for the play. We were having a conversation, and at the time, it was really early on, and this line, I just loved this line that John says about his relationship with his kind of at times rather trying wife who, you know, tells him that if he leaves his coffee cup in the car, it's going to cause this horrible thing to happen, and she's
COVID.
Just, you know, right. And he's explaining to her later when she's so upset that, or kind of in hindsight, that those times were just the part of her that he loved, and that was the white noise of their lives together. It was just how their relationship kind of blossomed in a weird way. And so when I said that to Brendan, he just kept hearing that word, white noise. And there's a scene in our play where it is only the primes in a different time, in a kind of future place where they're still alive as these primes. And Brendan and our wonderful production team were highly inspired to create literally white noise on the set in which they exist. I just thought that was so cool to take a kind of a concept like that from a play and realize it like that. Another question, perhaps.
We do. We have a final question from Heather. It looks like it's for everybody. Talk a little bit about the horrifying nature of this technology being available. Can you all see yourselves taking advantage of
Never, never, never in a million years. And I have a moment with Ruth on the couch when I can look at her and say, if I could have my mother here like this would be the most horrifying thing to do I could imagine. Because you just know you'd have to feed 50 years of memories into this, and you couldn't do it, and it would fail you, and you can't touch it. And it would just be this tempting thing. You know, never would I ever, in a bathtub, on a boat.
On a train.
It's not, I cannot imagine.
I think we've all played that game though, haven't we?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Who would, and the, you know, the Senior Serenity, they kind of invented those people for people with memory issues. They didn't necessarily invent them as
Right.
sources to help people who are grieving.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're kind of abusing the primes in this
Yeah.
play
Right.
a little bit, and it bites us in the
It
titties.
does.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing because there are references, like, because John, especially in the beginning of the play, is a big advocate for these primes. And he makes the case to Tess. And the biggest thing he's saying, I think, primarily is the convenience of this thing. So she makes the argument, you know, she doesn't want them being pacified. And he's saying, well, what's wrong with pacified? It's better than television. So, you know, there's this sense of purpose that's helpful for someone dealing with something in you know, in a state of dementia or something. But we go beyond that in this. I think we're using it beyond its designed purpose. And I think that's dangerous waters. I think that's where we start getting into trouble. And it's an interesting idea because it is something that, from his standpoint, he's saying, this is great. This is something that will be helpful. But then it goes south fast in that way.
Well, and that's the nature of technology. You put it out there and
It's convenient.
Yeah, it changes things. Changes videos, you know.
I'm just saying from John, I'm not advocating it. I'm just saying that that's what he...
But it does help Marjorie.
It does.
And
But
she likes it.
yeah, she does. She likes Walter a lot better than she likes you and I.
She does. Thank you for reminding me.
Well, I think it's interesting that Marjorie is the only one that didn't need Walter, that it was given to her to help her, and it wasn't that she was grieving the loss of Walter.
Right.
And
Yeah,
so,
that's interesting. Yeah,
so
you're
it's
right.
interesting that, you know, it was just like a toy to Marjorie, that it was just like this little, like, cute little man that used to be hers is, like, running around now. And so, you know, I've had this conversation over dinner about, like, what would that be like to, you know, bring somebody back. And I think what's interesting is that they make John, right, is the advocate for it, right, in the play. But what we talked about was that my roommate couldn't bring home a prime without speaking to me first, right? And so I think it's interesting to see that, yes, it's John, but there's a little dirty secret that Tess doesn't want to tell, because John would never have been able to bring home this mother, right? Like Tess's mom that's passed. She has things to say to, right? And I think that's the scary part. If we looked at it in the real world, it would be, I don't think that I could, I don't think
It's
I
a
could go
weird
there.
approach to therapy, isn't it?
Very
It
weird.
is.
Maybe it's a workable approach to therapy.
Sure.
It would depend on how it's programmed.
Especially
That's
if you're
right.
that opposed to therapy.
And who's giving it information?
And, yeah.
I mean, if it vacuumed, it'd be very helpful.
Right.
Back to the room.
Back to the rumba.
All it does is sit there.
Even a spoonful.
That's right.
So maybe we've come to the end of our time. Did we have our final question? I think we did. Thanks so much for joining us. This is the Blue Barn Theater's Creative Conversations about the play Marjorie Prime, which is continuing to run this weekend. Thursday through Sunday, the 28th, will be the last in-person performance. But this Friday, March 26th at 7 p.m., you can stream it one night only. So please, if you're interested in this play, if anything sparked your interest from what we said today, then we feel like we've done something great. And we'd like you to tune in to www.bluebarn.org and see how you can purchase a streaming ticket to see Marjorie Prime. Thanks so much. It's been a great pleasure to be a part of this wonderful theater. And we are all grateful to be participating in the theater again.
to be back on stage.
Yeah, back on stage.
Yay!
Share the
Good
link.
night.